The morning sun was just starting to peek through the dusty windows of Rodriguez Auto Repair when 17-year-old Maya walked through the familiar garage doors. The smell of motor oil and metal filled her nose, a scent that had become as comforting as her mother's cooking. She had been coming to this place since she was barely tall enough to see over the workbenches, always by her father's side. Her dad, Carlos, had owned this small repair shop for over 20 years. It wasn't fancy, just 4 service bays, concrete floors stained with years of grease, and walls covered with calendars from auto parts stores. But it was honest work, and Carlos took pride in fixing every car that rolled through his doors. Maya grabbed her usual spot on an old milk crate near bay number 3, where her father was already hunched over the hood of a red pickup truck. She pulled out her physics homework but found herself watching her dad's hands instead. The way he moved around an engine was like watching an artist paint. Every touch had purpose, every movement told a story. "Morning, mija," Carlos said without looking up, using the Spanish word for daughter that always made Maya smile. "This old Ford is giving me trouble. The starter keeps clicking but won't turn over." Maya set her books aside and walked over. Even though she was still in high school, she had learned more about cars in this garage than most people learned in trade school. Her father had never treated her differently because she was a girl. To him, curiosity and careful observation were more important than anything else. "Did you check the battery connections?" she asked, leaning in to look. "First thing I did," Carlos replied, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Voltage is good. Connections are clean." Maya nodded, thinking. She had seen this problem before. Her mind went through the possibilities like flipping through pages in a book. "What about the starter relay?" Carlos smiled. His daughter had a gift for this work that he had rarely seen in his many years of experience. "You're right. Let me check that." The garage had always been Maya's second home. While other kids her age were at the mall or playing video games, she was here learning about transmissions and brake systems. She could change oil, rotate tires, and diagnose simple problems, better than some adults who called themselves mechanics. But everything changed 3 weeks ago, when the new foreman arrived. Robert Thompson had 25 years of experience and certificates covering half his office wall. Carlos had hired him to help manage the growing business and train the newer mechanics. On paper, he looked perfect for the job. In person, he was a different story. Thompson was a big man with calloused hands and a voice that filled the entire garage when he spoke. He had old-fashioned ideas about a lot of things, especially about who belonged in a repair shop and who didn't. The first time he saw Maya helping her father, his face twisted into a frown. "Carlos, why is there a kid in the work area?" He had asked, his tone sharp. "This is a business, not a daycare center." Carlos had explained that Maya was his daughter and had been coming to the shop for years. She was careful, knowledgeable, and never got in the way. "I don't care whose kid she is," Thompson had replied. "Insurance won't cover us if something happens to a minor in the work area. She needs to stay in the office or go home." That conversation had been awkward, but Carlos had stood his ground. This was his shop, and Maya was family. Thompson had backed down, but his disapproval was obvious every time he looked at her. Since then, things had only gotten worse. Every morning, Thompson would find some reason to comment on Maya's presence. If she was reading near the work bays, he would say the space was needed for equipment. If she asked questions about the cars, he would remind everyone that this was a professional workplace, not a classroom. The other mechanics, Tony, Luis, and old Pete, had worked with Carlos for years. They knew Maya and respected her knowledge. But Thompson was their supervisor now, and they didn't want to cause trouble. Maya tried to ignore the constant comments, but it hurt. This garage had been her safe space, the place where she felt most confident and useful. Now she felt like an unwelcome visitor in her own second home. Her father noticed the change too. Carlos had always been protective of his daughter, but he also wanted her to learn to stand up for herself. He hoped Thompson would come around once he saw how much Maya actually knew about cars. That hope was about to be tested. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when everything came to a head. Maya had arrived early as usual, and was sitting quietly in the corner doing homework when Thompson walked in carrying his coffee and looking irritated about something. In bay 2 sat a car that had been causing problems for 3 days. A 1987 Chevrolet with a mysterious engine issue. It would start up just fine, idle for a few seconds, then suddenly die. No warning, no rough running, just sudden death. Tony had spent hours on it Monday. Luis had tried his best yesterday morning. Even Carlos had given it a thorough look, checking everything he could think of. The computer diagnostic tool showed no error codes. All the usual suspects, fuel pump, spark plugs, air filter, fuel injectors, had been tested and found to be working perfectly. The car's owner, Mrs. Patterson, had called twice asking when it would be ready. She was a regular customer who trusted the shop, but her patience was wearing thin. She needed her car for work and couldn't keep borrowing her neighbor's vehicle much longer. Maya had been watching the mechanics work on the Chevrolet for the past 2 days. From her corner spot, she had observed everything they tried. She had also noticed something that nobody else seemed to catch, a subtle pattern in how the engine behaved just before it died. But she hadn't said anything. After weeks of Thompson's comments about staying out of the way, she had learned to keep her observations to herself. This morning was different, though. Thompson was standing next to the Chevrolet, staring at it like it had personally insulted him. His frustration was obvious, and Maya could see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to figure out what everyone else had missed. Without thinking, Maya stood up and walked toward the car. She wasn't planning to interfere. She just wanted to take another look at the engine while Thompson was distracted. She had barely reached the front of the car when Thompson's voice boomed across the garage. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Maya froze. Every head in the shop turned toward them. Carlos looked up from his workbench with concern in his eyes. "I wasn't going to touch anything," Maya said quietly. "I just wanted to look." "Look?" Thompson's voice was getting louder. "This isn't a museum, kid. That engine isn't there for your entertainment." Maya felt her cheeks getting hot. "I know that. I just thought maybe—" "You thought what?" Thompson interrupted, taking a step closer. "That you could figure out what 3 professional mechanics couldn't? That your high school science class makes you qualified to work on a customer's car?" The garage had gone completely quiet. Even the radio in the corner seemed to have turned itself down. Maya could feel everyone watching, waiting to see what would happen next. "I've been around cars my whole life," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know more than you think I do." Thompson laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Oh, really? You know more than mechanics who've been doing this since before you were born?" He gestured toward the Chevrolet with obvious frustration. "This car has been sitting here for 3 days. 3 experienced mechanics have tried everything they know and it's still broken. But sure, maybe the teenager with grease under her fingernails has the magic answer." Maya's father started walking toward them, but Thompson wasn't finished. "Let me explain something to you, little girl," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Fixing cars isn't about watching YouTube videos or reading books. It's about real experience, real training, and real knowledge. It's about understanding that some jobs require actual professionals, not curious kids who think they know everything." The words hit Maya like physical blows. She had never claimed to know everything. She had always been respectful, careful, and eager to learn. But Thompson was treating her like she was some reckless child playing with dangerous toys. "Cars aren't toys," he went on. "Engines aren't puzzles for bored teenagers to solve. One wrong move, one careless mistake, and you could damage thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Or worse, you could get hurt." Carlos had reached them now, his face serious. "Thompson, that's enough." But the foreman wasn't done making his point. "I'm trying to protect everyone here, Carlos. Your daughter, the business, our customers' cars. She doesn't belong in the work area, and incidents like this prove it." Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. This garage had been her sanctuary, the place where she felt most capable and confident. Now Thompson was making her feel small and unwelcome in her own father's business. "She wasn't doing anything wrong," Carlos said firmly. "Maya knows these rules. She's been careful for years. Careful or not, she's a liability, Thompson replied. Professional shops don't have teenagers wandering around the work bays. It's not appropriate and it's not safe. Maya looked around the garage at the faces of the mechanics she had known for years. Tony looked uncomfortable. Luis was studying his shoes. Old Pete was shaking his head slightly, but he didn't say anything. She felt completely alone, despite being surrounded by people who had watched her grow up in this place. "I'm sorry," she whispered, stepping back from the car. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." She turned and walked quickly toward her usual corner, grabbing her backpack and books. The silence in the garage felt heavy and uncomfortable. As she headed for the door, Maya heard Thompson's voice one more time. "Maybe now we can get some real work done around here." Those words would echo in her mind for the rest of the week, along with a burning determination to prove that she belonged in that garage just as much as anyone else. The rest of that week felt like the longest 5 days of Maya's life. Every morning she would walk into the garage with her head down, trying to make herself invisible. The place that had once felt like home now felt cold and unwelcoming. Thompson's comments from Tuesday had spread through the small garage like spilled oil. Nobody talked about it directly, but Maya could feel the change in the air. The easy conversations she used to have with Tony and Luis became awkward and brief. Even old Pete, who had always been kind to her, seemed to avoid eye contact. Her father Carlos tried to act like nothing had changed, but Maya could see the tension in his shoulders. As the shop owner, he was caught between supporting his daughter and keeping peace with his new foreman. The business needed Thompson's experience, especially with 3 new mechanics starting next month. Maya started spending more time in the small office area, doing homework at the old metal desk in the corner. From there, she could still hear the sounds of the garage, the whir of air tools, the clank of wrenches, the rumble of engines being tested. But she felt separated from it all, like watching a movie instead of being part of the story. The mysterious Chevrolet was still there, sitting in Bay 2 like a puzzle nobody could solve. Maya had watched from a distance as different mechanics took turns with it. Each day, someone would spend a few hours trying something new, only to walk away shaking their head in frustration. Thompson had taken over the case personally by Wednesday, determined to show everyone how a real professional handled difficult problems. Maya watched him work with methodical precision, checking every system in the exact order that the repair manual suggested. "Fuel pressure is perfect," he announced to Tony, who was helping him test various components. "Spark is strong and consistent. Air intake is clean. Computer shows no error codes at all." Maya bit her tongue, remembering the pattern she had noticed on Tuesday morning. But after Thompson's public lecture about staying out of professional business, she kept her observations to herself. By Thursday afternoon, the garage's mood had grown even more tense. Mrs. Patterson had called 3 times, each conversation more strained than the last. She was a loyal customer who had been bringing her cars to Carlos for over 10 years, but her patience was running out. "I understand these things take time," Maya heard her say during the last phone call, "but I really need my car back. I've already missed 2 days of work and I can't keep borrowing my sister's vehicle." Carlos promised they would have an answer by Friday, but Maya could see the worry in his eyes. Losing Mrs. Patterson's trust could hurt the shop's reputation in their small town. Word traveled fast in places like theirs, and a few unhappy customers could seriously damage a business. Maya found herself studying the Chevrolet whenever Thompson wasn't around. From her desk in the office, she had a clear view of Bay 2. She watched the engine's behavior every time someone started it up for testing. The pattern was becoming clearer in her mind, but she felt trapped by Thompson's earlier words. Friday morning arrived with heavy gray clouds and the promise of rain. Maya walked into the garage to find Thompson standing next to the Chevrolet, his hands on his hips and frustration written all over his face. He had been working on the car for 3 straight days, trying every diagnostic procedure he knew. "This thing makes no sense," he muttered to Luis, who was organizing tools nearby. "Everything tests perfectly, but it won't stay running. It's like the car has a mind of its own." Maya watched from the office as Thompson tried starting the engine again. Just like every other time, it fired right up, idled smoothly for about 10 seconds, then suddenly died without warning. No coughing, no rough running, just instant silence. The computer should be throwing codes if something was really wrong, Thompson said, connecting his diagnostic scanner for what must have been the 20th time that week. But it keeps showing all systems normal. Maya knew that feeling of hitting a wall with a difficult problem. She had felt it herself when working on school projects or trying to understand complex math problems. The difference was that when she got stuck, she usually asked for help or tried looking at the problem from a different angle. But Thompson's pride seemed to prevent him from admitting he might need a fresh perspective. Around lunchtime, Maya overheard a conversation that made her stomach tighten with worry. Carlos was talking quietly with Tony near the coffee machine, but their voices carried to the office. "If we can't fix Mrs. Patterson's car today, she's going to take it somewhere else," Carlos said, "and probably tell everyone in town that we couldn't handle a simple repair." "Maybe we should call Jerry's shop," Tony suggested. "They've got that new diagnostic computer that can check things our equipment might miss." Carlos shook his head. "That would cost us more than we're charging for the repair. Plus, it would look like we don't know what we're doing." Maya felt a knot forming in her stomach. Her father had built this business from nothing, working 16-hour days for years to establish a reputation for honest, reliable service. The thought of that reputation being damaged over one stubborn car made her feel sick. But what could she do? Thompson had made it very clear that her input wasn't welcome. Even if she was right about what might be wrong with the engine, who would listen to her now? The afternoon brought the promised rain, drumming steadily on the garage's metal roof. The sound usually comforted Maya, but today it felt like nature crying along with her frustration. Thompson was back at the Chevrolet, his sleeves rolled up and his jaw set with determination. Maya could see sweat on his forehead despite the cool, rainy weather. He was feeling the pressure too, knowing that his reputation as the new foreman was on the line. "Come on, you piece of junk," she heard him mutter as he tried starting the engine again. "Just tell me what's wrong with you." Maya couldn't help herself. Despite everything that had happened, she felt sorry for him. She knew how it felt to be stumped by a problem that should have an obvious solution. The frustration could drive you crazy, especially when you knew people were watching and waiting. As the afternoon wore on, Maya noticed that some of the other mechanics were starting to gather around Bay 2. Word had gotten out that Thompson was struggling with the mysterious Chevrolet, and curiosity was getting the better of everyone. "What do you think it could be?" Luis asked quietly. "Maybe the fuel injectors are dirty," suggested Tony. "Already cleaned them twice," Thompson replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Tested the fuel pump pressure, checked all the vacuum lines, replaced the air filter. Everything that should cause this problem has been ruled out." Old Pete walked over, moving slowly on his bad knee. He had been fixing cars longer than anyone else in the shop, and his opinion carried weight. "Sometimes the old cars do things that don't make sense to modern tools," he said thoughtfully. "Back in my day, we had to rely more on our ears and our experience." Thompson nodded respectfully. Pete was one of the few people whose knowledge he didn't question. "Any ideas what I might be missing?" Pete studied the engine for a long moment, then shook his head. "Not off the top of my head, but maybe we're thinking too complicated. Sometimes the simplest problems are the hardest to see." Maya's heart started beating faster. Pete was right. Sometimes the most obvious problems were hiding in plain sight. She thought about the pattern she had observed, the subtle timing of when the engine died, the way it happened so consistently. But she stayed quiet, remembering Thompson's harsh words from earlier in the week. The last thing she wanted was another public lecture about staying out of professional business. As closing time approached, the tension in the garage was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mrs. Patterson would be calling first thing Monday morning, expecting her car to be ready. Thompson's reputation as the new foreman was hanging in the balance. Carlos's business was at risk of losing a valued customer. Maya watched as Thompson made one final attempt to start the engine. Once again, it fired up perfectly, idled smoothly, then died after exactly 10 seconds. He slammed his hand on the fender in frustration. "This is impossible," he said loudly, his voice echoing through the garage. "I've checked everything twice. The manual says this car should be running perfectly. That's when Maya made a decision. That would change everything. She stood up from her desk, took a deep breath, and walked toward Bay 2. Her heart was pounding, and her mouth felt dry. But she couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the rain on the roof. He turned around, surprise and annoyance flashing across his face. "What?" Maya swallowed hard, knowing that what she said next could either help solve the problem or get her banned from the garage forever. But she had to try. "I think I might know what's wrong with the car." The garage fell completely silent except for the sound of rain drumming overhead. Every mechanic stopped what they were doing and turned to look at the 17-year-old girl, who had just claimed she could solve the puzzle that had stumped them all. Thompson's face went through several expressions: surprise, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like anger. "Oh, really?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The high school student has figured out what 5 certified mechanics couldn't?" Maya felt her cheeks burning, but she didn't back down. "I've been watching the engine for 3 days. There's a pattern to how it fails that might mean—" "A pattern?" Thompson interrupted, his voice getting louder. "You think you've seen something that we've all missed? Something that our diagnostic equipment couldn't detect?" The other mechanics exchanged uncomfortable glances. Carlos started walking toward them, sensing another confrontation building. Thompson stepped closer to Maya, his frustration from the entire week finally boiling over. "Let me get this straight. You think that by sitting in the corner and watching, you've somehow become an expert on this engine? You think your homework and your YouTube videos have taught you more than 25 years of professional experience?" Maya's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to speak. "I'm not saying I'm an expert. I'm just saying I might have noticed something that could help." "Something that could help?" Thompson's laugh was bitter and cold. "This isn't a science fair project, kid. This is a real car belonging to a real customer who needs it fixed by real professionals." The tension in the garage was so thick it felt hard to breathe. Maya could see her father approaching, concern written all over his face. She could see the other mechanics watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Thompson looked at the Chevrolet, then back at Maya, and something seemed to snap inside him. All the pressure from the week, all the frustration with the impossible engine, all his doubts about having a teenager around the shop came together in one moment of reckless decision-making. "You know what?" he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the garage. "I'm tired of this. If you're so confident that you can figure out what we can't, then prove it." Maya's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, put your money where your mouth is," Thompson replied, crossing his arms. "You think you can fix this car? Then fix it. But when you fail, and you will fail, you stay out of this garage for good. No more hanging around, no more offering suggestions, no more pretending you know about cars, deal?" The challenge hung in the air like a storm cloud. Maya realized that Thompson had just offered her a chance to prove herself, but the stakes couldn't be higher. If she failed, she would lose the place that meant more to her than anywhere else in the world. But if she succeeded, maybe things could finally change. Maya looked at the stubborn Chevrolet, then at the faces of everyone watching her. Her father's expression was a mixture of pride and terror. The other mechanics looked curious and worried at the same time. Thompson stood with his arms crossed, confident that he had just called a bluff that would end this problem once and for all. Maya took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether she would ever feel at home in this garage again. "Deal," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The word "deal" seemed to echo through the garage like a gunshot. Maya felt every pair of eyes in the room focused on her, and for a moment, she wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Thompson's smile was cold and confident. He was absolutely certain that he had just solved 2 problems at once. The stubborn car would remain unfixed, proving that some jobs required real professionals, and Maya would be out of his hair forever. Carlos reached them just as Maya stepped toward the Chevrolet. His face was pale with worry. "Mija, you don't have to do this," he said quietly in Spanish, then switched to English. "Thompson, this isn't fair." She's just a kid. A kid who thinks she knows better than trained mechanics, Thompson replied, his arms still crossed. If she's so sure she can figure this out, let her try. But when she fails, she needs to accept that some places aren't meant for everyone. Maya's hands were trembling as she approached the car, but she tried to hide it. She had never felt pressure like this before. In school, if she got a wrong answer, she could try again tomorrow. Here, failure meant losing the place she loved most in the world. Take your time, Thompson said in a mocking tone. We've got all day to watch you learn why experience matters more than confidence. Maya ignored him and walked to the front of the Chevrolet. She had been thinking about this engine for 3 days, watching its behavior, forming theories in her mind. But now, with everyone staring at her, those theories felt fragile and uncertain. She took a deep breath and tried to remember what her father had always taught her. Listen to the car, he used to say when she was little. Every engine has its own voice. If you pay attention, it will tell you what's wrong. Well? Thompson's voice cut through her concentration. Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to show us this miracle diagnosis? Maya closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the pressure and the stares. She thought about the pattern she had observed, the way the engine always died after exactly the same amount of time, the complete lack of warning signs, the perfect diagnostic readings. When she opened her eyes, she felt calmer. She had an idea, and even if she was wrong, she had to try. Dad, can you start the engine for me? She asked. Carlos nodded, worry still etched on his face. He turned the key, and the Chevrolet fired up immediately, settling into a smooth idle just like it had hundreds of times before. Instead of checking gauges or connecting diagnostic equipment like everyone expected, Maya did something that surprised them all. She leaned down and pressed her ear against the engine block, listening carefully to the mechanical symphony inside. What is she doing? Luis whispered to Tony. Probably trying to look like she knows what she's doing, Thompson said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. This isn't a medical exam. You can't diagnose an engine by listening to it like a heartbeat. Maya ignored the comment and kept listening. She could hear the steady rhythm of the pistons, the whisper of the fuel injectors, the gentle hum of the cooling fan. But underneath all those normal sounds, there was something else, a tiny inconsistency that most people would never notice. After about 8 seconds, she heard it clearly, a subtle change in the timing, so small that it would be impossible to detect without listening carefully. 2 seconds later, the engine died, just like always. Maya straightened up, her heart racing with excitement. She had been right about her theory, but now she had to prove it to everyone else. It's not a fuel problem, she said, her voice stronger now. And it's not electrical either, Thompson laughed. Oh, really? Then what is it, Dr. Maya? What's your magical diagnosis? It's the timing, Maya replied, looking directly at him. Something is making the timing change while the engine is running. The timing? Thompson's voice was skeptical. We checked the timing belt on Wednesday. It's perfect. Not the timing belt, Maya said, walking around to the side of the engine. The harmonic balancer. A murmur went through the group of mechanics. The harmonic balancer was a part that most people never thought about. It was a heavy wheel attached to the front of the crankshaft, designed to smooth out vibrations and keep the engine running smoothly. That's impossible, Thompson said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. The harmonic balancer doesn't affect timing, and even if it did, we would see it on the diagnostic equipment. Maya shook her head. Not if the problem is inside, the balancer itself. The outer ring could be slipping on the inner hub. The garage fell quiet as everyone tried to understand what she was suggesting. Old Pete stepped forward, his weathered face thoughtful. I've seen that once before, he said slowly. Maybe 30 years ago, the rubber between the inner and outer parts of the balancer had rotted away, made the timing jump around like crazy. Thompson's face was getting red. That's a 1 in a million problem, and besides, it would show up on a timing light. Only if you knew to look for it, Maya replied, and only if you were checking the timing while the engine was actually failing. She turned to her father. Dad, do we have a timing light? Carlos nodded and went to get the tool. Maya's confidence was growing, but she could still feel Thompson's skeptical stare burning into her back. This is ridiculous, Thompson muttered. We're wasting time on a wild guess from someone who learned about cars from watching other people work. But Maya noticed that he didn't try to stop her. Deep down, even Thompson was curious to see if she might be right. After 3 days of failure, any new idea was worth exploring, even if it came from a teenager. Carlos returned with the timing light, a tool that used a strobe effect to make rotating parts appear stationary. It was the standard way to check engine timing, but Maya planned to use it differently than usual. Start the engine again, Dad, she said, connecting the timing light to the spark plug wire. The Chevrolet fired up once more, and Maya immediately pointed the timing light at the harmonic balancer. On the outer edge of the balancer was a small mark that should align perfectly with a pointer on the engine block. If the timing was correct and steady, the mark would appear to stay in one position under the strobe light. For the first few seconds, everything looked normal. The timing mark held steady right where it should be. See? Thompson said triumphantly. Perfect timing, just like we found before. But Maya kept watching, counting silently in her head. 8 seconds, 9 seconds. Suddenly, the timing mark began to jump erratically. Instead of staying in one position, it danced back and forth as if the balancer couldn't decide where it was supposed to be. There, Maya said excitedly, pointing at the jumping mark. Do you see that? Everyone crowded around to look. Even Thompson pushed forward to get a better view. The timing mark continued to jump wildly for another second. Then the engine died, just like it had every other time. The garage was completely silent except for the sound of rain still drumming on the roof. Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her, some amazed, some confused, all focused on what they had just witnessed. Old Pete was the first to speak. Well, I'll be, he said quietly. That's exactly what I saw 30 years ago. The balancer is coming apart inside. Tony and Luis were nodding, finally understanding what had been happening. The engine would start and run normally until the damaged harmonic balancer heated up and expanded. Then the inner hub would start slipping against the outer ring, causing the timing to jump around randomly. Once the timing got too far off, the engine would simply quit. Thompson stood frozen, staring at the harmonic balancer as if he couldn't believe what he had just seen. His confident expression had been replaced by shock and something that might have been embarrassment. That's not possible, he stammered. I've been doing this for 25 years. I would have thought to check for that. It's not a common problem, Maya said gently, trying not to sound like she was rubbing it in. And you were checking all the right things. The diagnostic computer can't detect this kind of failure because it happens so quickly and randomly. Carlos was beaming with pride, but he tried to keep his voice calm. So the fix would be to replace the harmonic balancer? Maya nodded. It's about a $40 part. Should take maybe 2 hours to install. The silence stretched on as everyone absorbed what had just happened. A 17-year-old girl had solved a problem that had stumped 5 experienced mechanics for 3 days. She had done it not with expensive diagnostic equipment or years of training, but with careful observation and logical thinking. Thompson finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. How did you know to check for that? Maya shrugged, suddenly feeling shy again. I noticed that the engine always died after the same amount of time. That made me think something was changing gradually while it was running. Heat expansion seemed like the most likely cause. But why the harmonic balancer specifically? Luis asked. There are lots of parts that expand when they heat up. Because all the other systems tested normal, Maya explained. The only thing that could cause this kind of timing problem without triggering error codes would be physical movement of the crankshaft timing. The harmonic balancer was the only part that made sense. Thompson slowly walked around the car, studying the engine as if seeing it for the first time. When he looked back at Maya, his expression was completely different from what it had been an hour earlier. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. A big one. Maya felt a mix of relief and vindication, but also something unexpected, sympathy for Thompson. She could see how hard it was for him to admit he had been wrong, especially in front of everyone. You couldn't have known, she said. Like Pete said, it's a really rare problem, but Thompson shook his head. That's not what I need to apologize for. I was wrong about you, wrong about what you're capable of, and wrong about who belongs in this garage. He paused, looking around at the other mechanics before continuing. I let my pride and my old-fashioned thinking get in the way of recognizing real talent. What you just did. I couldn't have done that, none of us could. Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of relief and happiness. The challenge that could have banned her from the garage forever had instead proven that she truly belonged there. Carlos walked over and put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. I'm proud of you, mija, he said softly. But I always knew you had this gift. As the initial shock wore off, the garage began to buzz with excited conversation. Tony and Luis were already planning how to get the replacement part. Pete was telling stories about other unusual problems he had seen over the years. But Maya found herself looking at Thompson, who was still staring at the engine with a mixture of amazement and respect. The impossible had become possible, and in doing so, it had changed everything. The rain had stopped by the time Maya finished explaining her diagnosis, and weak afternoon sunlight was filtering through the garage windows. But the real brightness in the room came from the smiles on everyone's faces. Everyone except Thompson, who still looked like he was trying to process what had just happened. So we just need to replace the harmonic balancer? Tony asked, already pulling out his phone to call the parts store. Maya nodded. It should fix the problem completely. Once we put in a new one, the timing will stay steady and the engine will run perfectly. Carlos was practically glowing with pride, but he tried to keep his voice calm and professional. Let's order the part and get Mrs. Patterson's car fixed. She's been more than patient with us. As Tony made the phone call to order the replacement part, Maya found herself surrounded by the other mechanics. Luis was asking questions about how she had figured out the timing connection. Old Pete was nodding approvingly and sharing stories about similar problems from his decades of experience. But it was Thompson's reaction that Maya was most curious about. The big man who had been so confident just an hour ago was now standing quietly by himself, occasionally glancing at the Chevrolet and shaking his head in disbelief. Maya walked over to him, feeling nervous but determined to clear the air. Mr. Thompson? He looked up at her and she was surprised to see genuine respect in his eyes. I can't believe I missed that, he said quietly. 3 days I spent on that car, and I never even considered the harmonic balancer. It's not obvious, Maya said, trying to be generous. I only figured it out because I had time to watch and think about the pattern. Thompson was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at her. Can I ask you something? How long have, you been learning about cars? Maya smiled. My whole life, really. Dad started letting me help with simple things when I was about 5. At first, I just handed him tools and watched. But over the years, he taught me more and more. And you've never had formal training? No classes or certifications? Just what I learned here in the garage, Maya replied. And some things I read about on my own when I got curious about how something worked. Thompson shook his head in amazement. What you just did, that kind of diagnostic thinking usually takes years to develop. The way you connected the timing, pattern to heat expansion to the harmonic balancer, that's not something you can learn from a book. Maya felt her cheeks warming from the praise. After a week of feeling unwelcome and doubted, Thompson's words meant more than she had expected. I think I owe you more than just an apology, Thompson continued. I owe you an explanation for why I acted the way I did. Maya waited, curious, to hear what he would say. Thompson looked around the garage, taking in the scene of mechanics working together and sharing knowledge. I started working on cars when I was about your age, he said. But back then, it was different. Older mechanics didn't want to teach young people, especially if you weren't their own family. I had to fight for every bit of knowledge I gained. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I guess somewhere along the way I started thinking that's how it should be, that people needed to earn their place through struggle and proving themselves, over and over again. Maya nodded, beginning to understand. But you were trying to protect the shop too, right? Making sure nothing went wrong? That's what I told myself, Thompson admitted, But really, I think I was just scared. Scared that maybe the old ways of doing things weren't the only ways. Scared that someone with fresh eyes might see things I couldn't. The conversation was interrupted by Tony, who had finished his phone call. Good news. They have the harmonic balancer in stock. I can pick it up in 20 minutes and we should be able to install it before closing time. Carlos clapped his hands together. Perfect. Let's get Mrs. Patterson's car finished today. As Tony left to get the part, the mood in the garage continued to lighten. Louise started joking about how they were going to explain to Mrs. Patterson that her car was fixed by a teenager. Old Pete was telling stories about other times when the obvious solution had been hiding in plain sight. But Maya noticed that Thompson was still standing apart from the group, looking thoughtful and somewhat sad. Are you okay? She asked him quietly. Thompson sighed. I keep thinking about all the things I said to you this week. About how you didn't belong here, about how fixing cars required real professionals. I was so wrong, and I said it all in front of everyone. Maya considered this. You know, when I was younger, I used to get really upset when adults didn't believe I could do something. But my dad taught me that sometimes people's doubts say more about their own fears than about your abilities. Your father sounds like a wise man, Thompson said. He is, and he also taught me that everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow, even adults who make mistakes. Thompson looked at her with surprise, then a slow smile spread across his face. You're pretty wise yourself, you know that? The sound of Tony's truck pulling up interrupted their conversation. He hopped out carrying a box with the new harmonic balancer, ready to finally fix the stubborn Chevrolet. Who wants to help me install this thing? Tony called out. I will, Thompson said immediately. Then he turned to Maya. That is, if you don't mind working with me. I'd like to learn how you approach problems like this. Maya grinned. I'd love to show you what I've learned. The next 2 hours flew by as Maya and Thompson worked together to remove the old harmonic balancer and install the new one. It was more complicated than Maya had expected. They had to drain the radiator, remove the cooling fan, and carefully pull the crankshaft pulley. But Thompson was patient and encouraging, asking questions about her thought process and explaining some of the more technical aspects of the repair. It was like having a completely different person working beside her, compared to the man who had challenged her earlier that day. The key is getting the new balancer lined up perfectly, Thompson explained as they prepared to install the replacement part. If it's even slightly off, it could cause vibration problems later. Maya nodded, concentrating on the alignment marks they had made before removing the old part. Like this? Perfect, Thompson said. You've got steady hands and good attention to detail. Those are important skills for this kind of work. As they tightened the last bolt, Maya felt a sense of satisfaction she had never experienced before. This wasn't just about proving she could diagnose a problem. She had actually fixed a car that would make someone's life better. Moment of truth, Carlos said, walking over with the keys. Let's see if our diagnosis was correct. Maya held her breath as her father turned the key. The Chevrolet fired up immediately, settling into a smooth, steady idle. 10 seconds passed. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. The engine kept running perfectly with no sign of the timing problems that had plagued it all week. A cheer went up from everyone in the garage. Luis was high-fiving Tony. Old Pete was nodding approvingly. Carlos was beaming, with pride at his daughter's success. But the moment that meant the most to Maya was when Thompson walked over and extended his hand to her. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for showing me that there's always something new to learn and that good ideas can come from anywhere. Maya shook his hand, feeling like they had reached a real understanding. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself, Thompson smiled. Actually, I have a proposition for you. How would you feel about helping me train the new mechanics who are starting next month? I think they could learn a lot from your approach to problem solving. Maya's eyes widened. Really? You want me to help train other mechanics? I think you have a gift for seeing problems differently, Thompson said. That's something that can't be taught from a manual. It has to be shared from one person to another. Carlos walked over, having overheard the conversation. What do you think, Mika? Are you interested? Maya looked around the garage, at the tools and equipment she had grown up with, at the mechanics who had become like family, at the cars waiting to be fixed. For the first time in a week, everything felt right again. I'd love to, she said, but I have one condition. Thompson raised an eyebrow. What's that? We teach them that the best diagnostic tool isn't a computer or a scanner, Maya said. It's the ability to listen, observe, and think creatively about problems. Thompson laughed. Deal. Absolutely deal. As the sun was setting, Mrs. Patterson arrived to pick up her car. Maya watched from the office as her father explained what had been wrong and how they had fixed it. He didn't mention that the diagnosis had come from his 17-year-old daughter, but Mrs. Patterson was so relieved to have her car back that she probably wouldn't have cared if it had been fixed by a trained monkey. Thank you so much, Maya heard her say as she paid the bill. I knew I could count on you to figure it out. After Mrs. Patterson drove away in her perfectly running Chevrolet, the garage began to quiet down for the day. The other mechanics started cleaning up their work areas and putting away tools. Maya was organizing some paperwork when Thompson approached her one more time. I wanted you to know, he said, that I'm going to recommend you for a scholarship program I know about. It's for young people who show exceptional mechanical aptitude. The program helps pay for engineering school. Maya looked up in surprise. Engineering school? With your diagnostic skills and problem-solving ability, you could go far in automotive engineering, Thompson explained. You could design better cars, develop new diagnostic systems, maybe even start your own business someday. The idea was exciting and terrifying at the same time. Maya had always assumed she would work in her father's garage for the rest of her life. She had never really thought about what other possibilities might be out there. Think about it, Thompson said. You don't have to decide anything right now. But I wanted you to know that your talents could take you anywhere you want to go. As Maya drove home with her father that evening, she thought about everything that had happened. A week ago, she had felt unwelcome and doubted in the place she loved most. Today, she had not only proven herself, but had earned the respect of someone who had initially dismissed her. More importantly, she had learned something about herself. She had always known she was good with cars, but she had never realized that her way of thinking might be special or valuable to others. Dad, she said as they stopped at a red light. Do you think I should consider engineering school? Carlos smiled. I think you should consider whatever makes you happy, mija. Whether that's working in the garage, going to school, or doing something completely different. But what about the shop? Don't you need me here? I need you to be happy and fulfilled, Carlos replied. If that means staying here, wonderful. If it means going to school and coming back with new knowledge, even better. If it means going somewhere else entirely, I'll be proud of you no matter. What? Maya nodded, feeling grateful for a father who had always supported her dreams even when she wasn't sure what those dreams were. The story of Maya's diagnosis spread quickly through their small town. Within a week, other shop owners were calling to ask Carlos about his daughter's remarkable problem-solving skills. A local newspaper wanted to write an article about the teenager who had solved the impossible car problem. But Maya's favorite response came from an unexpected source. 3 days after fixing Mrs. Patterson's car, a young girl named Amy walked into the garage with her mother. Amy was about 12 years old and was fascinated by cars just like Maya had been at that age. My mom said there's a girl here who's really good at fixing cars, Amy said shyly. Is that true? Maya smiled, remembering how it felt to be the only girl interested in mechanical things. It's true. Do you like cars too? Amy nodded enthusiastically. I love watching my dad work on our truck, but he says girls don't usually become mechanics. Maya knelt down to Amy's level. Let me tell you something I learned this week. Good ideas and mechanical talent don't care if you're a boy or a girl. They just care if you're curious and willing to learn. As Maya showed Amy around the garage, explaining how different tools worked and what various car parts did, Thompson watched from across the room. The smile on his face showed that he understood something important was happening. The cycle was beginning again, but this time with understanding, encouragement, and the knowledge that talent could come from anywhere. and that everyone deserved the chance to pursue their dreams regardless of what anyone else thought was possible.